I'm curious, do you think it's possible to live to be 256 years old? Well, there's a report of a man from China named Li Qingyun who is reported to have lived to be 256 years old. And this is actually said to have been recorded and verified by journalists. And so let's talk about it because I'm interested to know what he might have done if he did actually live to be 256 years old and what we can learn from him. So let's dive into Mr. Li Qingyun's story because you can find this easily online. Now, obviously, if you're like me, you may have a little healthy skepticism about whether or not he actually lived to be 256 years old. One thing I do find really interesting about his story is that he was a seller of medicinal herbs. So it said that he would collect herbs like lingzhi, which is reishi mushroom, goji berry, ginseng, ahisha wool, and others. And he obviously probably used these herbs as well. And this makes a lot of sense because herbs like reishi mushroom and wild ginseng were considered really wonderful longevity herbs in traditional China. And so using these herbs might have been one reason why this man was able to live a long life. Whether or not it was 256 years, there might be questions to that. But let's dive into the herbs that he purportedly used and sold and how they might have helped him to live a long life. Because if you are really tired and wired, you're not sleeping well, you feel like you're kind of running on fumes, these herbs like reishi mushroom and ginseng are what we call adaptogens, and they can play a key role in helping you with supporting your energy and your stress resilience and even longevity. So, I want to talk to you today about adaptogens and why I love them and I use them as the foundation in nearly every formula that I create for my own clients. And I want to show you a little bit about the science, what are adaptogens, what qualifies as an adaptogen, because sometimes people are calling something an adaptogen that isn't. And then I want to share with you some of the benefits of adaptogens for your health, how to use adaptogens appropriately, and how some adaptogens may actually make you feel worse instead of better if you don't know how to use the right adaptogen for your situation. I also want you to know I have a free guide below. It's called my Mood Fix Assessment. You can grab that. It will help you in figuring out what herbs and supplements might best support your mood. And if you're here and you're interested in learning about herbal medicine as a practitioner, you can come to my free botanical medicine masterclass where I'll show you how to use herbs like adaptogens with clients to help them with their mood, energy, immune function, and more. So let's dive into adaptogens and why I think we need more understanding of how adaptogens work, and more people just need to be taking adaptogens. So, first, what are adaptogens? These have been used for thousands of years in traditional Chinese medicine. Again, we have herbs like ginseng and reishi mushroom and others that were considered tonic herbs from traditional medicine. We have some from Ayurvedic medicine and other herbal medicine traditions. But this word adaptogen really didn't come into use until modern times. In fact, it was coined by a Soviet scientist named Dr. Nikolai Lazarev. And in the 1940s, he was a Soviet scientist who was actually tasked with finding substances that would help create more resilience to stress for soldiers in the Soviet military and other workers in the government. And really, this was just because the government wanted to get more out of their military and their workers. They wanted them to be able to withstand more stress, get less sleep, and still have the energy and the mental capacity to focus. And so this was work he was doing to find what kind of substances would work to build up some resilience to stress. He was looking for what we call a state of non-specific resistance. And at first, he actually started working with like synthetic substances and medications, but he was finding, of course, there were some drawbacks, there were some side effects to those types of products. So he switched over to studying herbs that might be able to help build this resilience to stress. And he was studying herbs like ginseng. He was actually working with another researcher named Dr. I. Brinkman, who was studying Panax ginseng and found that they were learning a lot about how these herbs could really build up this resilience to stressors. Now, they actually switched to studying eleuthero instead of ginseng, and a lot of that just had to do with the fact that eleuthero was more accessible, it was less expensive than ginseng, which is still true today. Ginseng is an amazing herb that can be hard to get your hands on in good quality. And so, as they were studying these herbs, they noticed that these herbs did, in fact, help build up some resilience to stress. And they coined that term adaptogens. And there are three criteria for an adaptogen. So, an adaptogen has to be number one, relatively non toxic. It's safe for long term use. It means over time, at relatively normal levels of use, it's not going to have any kind of negative side effects on the body. The other criteria is that there's non-specific action. So this means it increases resilience to a broad spectrum of stressors. And this can be chemical, biological, psychological, physical stressors. This is something I think that's really amazing about adaptogens, actually, is how they build up this resilience to stressors of all types. Again, biological, chemical, it can be either radiological or psychological or physical. It's amazing to me that they can work on all of these different levels of the body. But they also have a third criteria, and that is that they have a normalizing effect on the body. It just means they help to regulate and restore organ system and function, and they don't actually have a specific action on any specific organ or system of the body other than that HPA axis, right? That overall stress resilience response of the body. So this means that anything that we consider an adaptogen needs to fit these three criteria. I admit these are a bit broad in understanding, but it is important to know that if we're going to call something an adaptogen, it needs to fit these criteria, because I hear people using this word adaptogen a bit loosely today. And I think it's important that we maintain the integrity of what an adaptogen is, because again, these are really amazing, potent herbs that help build up this resilience to stress. And it's why I use them in a lot of my formulas. Now, most people think of adaptogens as, again, just these stress herbs, right? Or adrenal herbs, but that's really missing out on a big piece of the puzzle, because adaptogens do help regulate that HPA axis response to stress, but they also work at the cellular level. They protect mitochondria, they regulate the nervous system. Many of them help modulate immunity and influence longevity markers. And we're going to talk about those here in a moment. But it's really important as well to know that not all adaptogens are created equally. There are energetics associated with each herb. An herb can be warming or cooling, for example. It can be moistening or it can be drying. It can be stimulating or it can be a bit sedating. And we need to know that because we're going to match the energetics of the herbs we're using with the person who's taking the herbs. It's not enough just to know that these herbs are adaptogens. You can use it with the wrong person and they may not feel great. I'm going to share a couple of stories with you about that as well. But before we dive into that, I want to show you how adaptogens work, because this is really pretty amazing to understand. Now, again, when the research around adaptogens started, they were really looking at how adaptogens build up this non-specific resilience to stress, right? And by doing that, they work on that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, that crosstalk between the brain and the adrenals that modulates our stress response. So if we have a stressor, we need to get up and take action, that fight or flight response that kicks in, the brain tells the adrenals to release different hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, for example. And these hormones then create this metabolic pathway, signaling pathway that creates a whole influence of key metabolic regulators. Again, cortisol being one of them, but also things like cytokines and catecholamines and our neurotransmitters, sex hormones, nitric oxide, all of these players show up to the party when our stress response kicks in. And this is why they affect stress systemically, right? Not just one organ, but everything is having a metabolic conversation with one another in terms of these metabolic regulators and the signals they're sending to the body to turn off or turn on specific pathways so we can take action. We can come into that fight or flight response, do what we need to do to address those stressors. Here, however, is what I think gets really interesting about adaptogens because they also work on the cellular level to affect mitochondrial function. And mitochondria, of course, we call those the powerhouse of the cell. We know this is how we make energy at the cellular level. And we know a lot of chronic health issues are related to mitochondrial dysfunction. In fact, if you're dealing with things like fatigue, brain fog, or anxiety, or depression, chronic pain, there is a mechanism where those mitochondria may not be functioning optimally. We can actually start to lose mitochondrial function, and that's going to impact this entire metabolic conversation of the body. So I think it's really, really fascinating, actually, that adaptogens can impact mitochondrial function in a couple of different ways. One of the things they do is they activate something called heat shock proteins, and these are what are called molecular chaperones. These are just proteins that help protect the mitochondria from stress-induced damage. So now we have a little bit more information of how exactly these adaptogens work on the cellular level to help support energy and more resilience to stress. Another thing they do is upregulate FOXO, FOXO, and this is a protein as well that inhibits stress effects. They detoxify cells and they support longevity. In research, adaptogens have also been shown to upregulate neuropeptide Y, and this plays a role in our neurotransmitter function, reducing anxiety, lowering blood pressure, and inhibiting cortisol release, right? That stress hormone that keeps us stuck in fight or flight and anxiety. One other quick thing that I think is really cool about adaptogens, they help to regulate something called JNK kinase or junk kinase, which can drive inflammation and oxidative stress and decrease ATP production. Now, remember, ATP is what the mitochondria kick out. It's the energy currency of the body. So anything that's increasing inflammation can damage our mitochondria. And a lot of our herbs, not just adaptogens, have an anti-inflammatory effect to the body. This is what I love about herbal medicine. It works on so many levels to influence the entire metabolic conversation of the body. There's this whole cascade of effects that are happening in the body when we take a whole herb. And this is also why adaptogens are useful in fatigue conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or cancer-related fatigue or even just adrenal exhaustion. Last thing I want to tell you about the benefits of taking an adaptogen, and this is a little bit of a shift, but they are also known as immune amphoterics, or at least many of our adaptogens are. An immune amphoteric is another category of herbal medicine that enhances immune function and helps to moderate hyperactive immune responses. So, what that basically means is it helps to balance the immune function. So, if someone has an underactive immune system, or they might have allergies and overactive immune responses, it's going to help bring that immune system back into balance, right? You may know we have different sides, if you will, of the immune system, like the Th1 versus Th2 immunity, and these need to be balanced. Otherwise, we're going to see a lot of immune type of symptoms like gut inflammation, autoimmunity, allergies, poor immune function, getting sick with colds and viruses all of the time. Those are things that can point to an imbalanced immune system. And so, in many of our adaptogens, like ashwagandha and others are immune amphoterics. So again, there's this normalizing action on the body, right? It's not pushing the body in one specific direction. It's helping to normalize function. So now that you understand how adaptogens work, I want to talk about choosing the right one. And this is where I see a lot of clinical mistakes happen. So definitely pay attention, especially if you are a aspiring herbalist or you are a healthcare practitioner who uses herbal medicine in any capacity. You really want to know how to use them correctly because I've had many clients come to me who worked with a functional medicine practitioner or another holistic practitioner who gave them an adaptogen, but it was the wrong one and actually made them feel worse. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you. But if you are here because you're wanting to learn about how to use herbal medicine as an herbalist or an holistic practitioner, again, make sure you sign up for my free training, the Botanical Medicine Masterclass. I'm going to show you how to dive into adaptogens even more deeply and use the right one for your clients. But this is the part I wanted to share with you about how to choose the right adaptogen. And I mentioned energetics earlier, and this is really the key to using herbs in any capacity, is really understanding the energetics of each herb. And we might understand the action of an herb, like it's an adaptogen or immune amphoteric, but that's not all we need to know. We need to know, is this herb warming, drying, stimulating, energizing? Is it cooling, moistening, right? We want to know if these herbs are going to have a specific effect on the person we're working with. So, number one, we need to understand the energetics of the person that we're giving herbs to, whether that's you or someone you're working with. And then we need to match the right herbs to that person. So let me give you a couple of examples from herbal medicine. Rhodiola is a great example of this because it's one of our more stimulating adaptogens and it can be quite drying actually. And I remember teaching a class years ago on rhodiola and I had mentioned this concept of energetics and how rhodiola can be quite drying for many people. And I had someone come up to me afterwards and tell me they had been taking rhodiola and they couldn't figure out why they kept dealing with really dry eyes and dry skin. It was really not the best herb for them. They were also taking rhodiola by itself in a form that was a standardized extract. Not my favorite way to take herbs because we need to combine herbs in synergistic formulas to get the best results. We can also help balance out some of the energetics of an herb when we combine them in formulas. But that's one example. As I mentioned, rhodiola can also be quite stimulating. And I remember hearing another herbalist talking about rhodiola, how she had taken it at one point in her life. It was really helping, but then she went through a really stressful time. She was really just dealing with, I don't even remember what kind of stress it was. And she would try taking rhodiola and she would get heart palpitations and anxiety because it was overstimulating her. And she was already in a place of being overstimulated and was really making that worse for her. So we want to understand how these herbs work and use them appropriately, or we can make ourselves feel worse. Now, on the flip side of that, I want to talk about ashwagandha because it is an adaptogen as well, but it is more of a grounding, nourishing. I almost want to use the word sedating, although I don't think it's quite what we would call a sedative herb, but it can be quite grounding is a word we might use, right? And so relaxing could be a word here. And I've actually worked with a client who came to me. She had worked with another practitioner, I think a functional medicine practitioner, who had done a cortisol panel for this client and found she probably did need some adrenal support. She had really low morning cortisol, low energy. She wasn't sleeping well, but her practitioner gave her ashwagandha. And she felt much worse on ashwagandha. She felt more depressed, more lethargic. It was harder to get out of bed in the morning. And this energetic of ashwagandha is why. It was too relaxing, too heavy and grounding for her. And she needed something a little more stimulating. She might actually have done well with rhodiola in this case. But again, I paired her with some other adaptogens that really fit her picture, and she started seeing an improvement with her energy and sleep. So we want to think about the energetics of these herbs and those stimulating adaptogens like Asian ginseng or American ginseng and rhodiola versus maybe more calming or relaxing energetics of adaptogens like ashwagandha or reishi mushroom to an extent. So those are things you need to think about and know about these herbs in order to use them appropriately. And so let's talk about how to use them appropriately because you're going to get the best results using adaptogens when you use them long term. Again, these were what were known as tonic herbs in traditional medicine. We didn't really have that word adaptogens. And I will say, not all herbs that are tonic herbs are adaptogens, but certainly our adaptogens can fit in for the most part into this category of tonic herbs. And there's this idea with tonic herbs, right? We need to use them long term for weeks to months or longer in order to help balance and rebuild that HPA axis response to stress, shore up our mitochondrial function, and balance the immune system. I also want to add, though, they are not a replacement for sleep or nutrition or movement or lifestyle practices, right? They're not a crutch. So don't think you're going to just pop an adaptogen and run out the door and live a stressful life and not eat well, and that these are just going to fix that problem, right? Again, I teach my clients how to understand the metabolic conversation of the body. And in that conversation, everything matters, right? Everything we do is going to have an impact on balancing our hormones, our ability to handle stress, our immune function. I definitely think more people could be benefiting from adaptogens. I also think it's important to pair adaptogens in synergistic formulas. Again, we saw how adaptogens work on a number of different mechanisms in the body. And part of the reason for that is that each adaptogen is made up of dozens, if not potentially hundreds, of different phytochemical constituents that impact inflammation, nervous system regulation, mitochondrial function, etc. And so when we take a whole herb, we're getting the synergy of all of those compounds from that herb, and we can multiply that by combining herbs in formulas. So I often pair adaptogens with herbs, which we call nervines, which help support the nervous system, or nootropics, which are going to help enhance cerebral circulation and cognitive function. And I also will often use them with other restorative tonics like fresh milky oat or astragalus. So, to sum it up, adaptogens have an amazing way of just shoring up the resilience to stress in the body, supporting mitochondrial function. And these truly are foundational principles of regulating that metabolic conversation of the body and tapping into our healing response and supporting longevity. So, I love adaptogens, and I think most of us could be doing them better. And I think most people could benefit from using the right adaptogen. They work at the HPA axis, mitochondria, the cellular level, and this is what makes them so powerful for longevity and resilience. But remember that the energetics matter, so you want to learn how to use these appropriately. So grab my free resources below. There's that mood fix assessment if you're wanting help with your energy and mood. If you're here because you are a practitioner or aspiring herbalist, make sure you grab my free class below. We're going to dive into adaptogens even more in that class. So I will see you next time where we'll talk more about herbs.